everybody, and welcome to the Paranormal Portal. I'm your host, Brent Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got an epic show ahead, but just remember, if any of you have experiences you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. You can either email me at paranormalportalradio@gmail.com or head over to paranormalportal.net and scroll down and find the button that says Interview Me, and that'll allow you to look at a calendar of possible times and dates and find a date that works for you. Love to hear your stories, so definitely get in touch with me. Hey everybody, welcome to the Paranormal Portal podcast. I'm your host, Brent Thomas, and I am thrilled that you are here listening to my show. Thank you all so much for your love and support, and thank you all, those of you who are out there recommending the show to new listeners. I really appreciate that a bunch. We are about to dive into another epic journey here on the Paranormal Portal. I am joined by a longtime friend of mine, both professionally and personally, Mr. Matt Knapp of Bigfoot Crossroads podcast, and he is joining me today, and we're going to put him on the hot seat because he had me on his hot seat just a few last week. So it's his turn. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's get right after it. Mr. Knapp, sir, how you doing?
Doing good, man. Doing good. I do enjoy a good hot seat.
Well, you know, I like providing them as well. So I appreciate you coming on, though, man. We've always had really fantastic discussions every time we've connected, and you know, it's just always really fun to dive into the deeper end of this stuff. But I know you've been on the show before, so we don't need to go back into my one canned question, which is, how did this start for you? We've already discussed that, but the journey continues, huh? How's everything going on Bigfoot Crossroads, first of all?
Everything's going good, man. It's going real good. Still growing, so that's always a plus whenever you're doing a podcast. Yeah. It's definitely kind of taken on its own life, its own trajectory from how it started, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of variety in the people that I have on.
Yes.
Still to this day, you know, you get the classic Bigfoot stories from people, but really there's so many different theories and outlooks on the subject. And then whenever I venture off into other topics, it gets even stranger. Mm-hmm. But man, it still kind of gives me pause.
Yeah.
How often I'll ask somebody who's on there for Bigfoot, you know, they're telling me a Bigfoot story. Mm-hmm. And I always have to ask, well, have you seen anything else strange? And like, usually at least 8 times out of 10, the answer is yes. And they have some story about a UFO or a ghost or something else. And it just makes me think that all this stuff has to be connected in some sort of universal way that we don't understand.
That's very, very good point. And you find that quite a bit. I know I have as well, that like you said, if somebody has one account, generally they've had or will have more. What do you think that is? Do you think that, I don't know, maybe by virtue of having one experience that something changes for the observer, or do you think it's just that they're paying more attention now, or what do you think might be going on there?
Yeah, you know, that also has a ton of theories behind it. Personally, I think it might be more of a combination of factors. I think that it's definitely possible that the different phenomenon are somehow connected. Mm-hmm. You know, that's a very popular theory that kind of once the door's open, it's open and you see all sorts of things then.
Right.
I also think that once you come to the realization that there are things out there that aren't supposed to exist, for most people, that kind of puts you down this path of, well, what else is out there? And you start really paying attention to your surroundings and what's going on. And whenever you hear that noise in the middle of the night, you don't just immediately dismiss it as just the house settling.
Right.
And I think that leads to a lot of other things. I think it's just the idea of once something has been proven to you, you're more open to the possibility of other things being out there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that it really is about creating an awareness in a person. And much like, I guess maybe it's something like a deer hunter versus just some casual walker in the woods. Like a deer hunter will pick out, oh, there's 3 doe over there, or there's a buck there, there's a buck rub. They'll see all of these things, whereas the casual walker will be like, oh, it's a nice day in the woods. They have two very different experiences. So that's a great point, that there's an awareness shift that happens once you become open to the idea.
Oh, for sure. And I also think, in fairness, on the skeptical side of things, I think a little mental pareidolia takes place as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you do think that you've had an encounter with something, or you had an encounter with something, sometimes the mental aspect of that affects people differently in a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
And a little paranoia sets in, and then you start seeing things that just aren't there. But
Right.
to the observer, they are. It's still a very real process that they go through, whether it's actual or not.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. And like everything else, I suppose, everybody reacts to things differently, but it does certainly seem to break a seal, so to speak. It's kind of like, it's kind of like when you're out drinking with your buddies and stuff, and you try to put off going to the bathroom the first time, because after that you're going to be running laps. And maybe that's kind of the same thing for this paranormal or supernatural 40 and stuff, is that once you broke that seal, then it just keeps coming and coming. But I think it's fascinating. Now, would you say throughout the course of your journey that your idea, or at least your understanding, I don't want to say understandings, but your perceptions of these varied phenomena have changed quite a bit?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. I don't think you can do this for a long time without it changing. Right. I think everybody goes through that metamorphosis stage at some point. While they may not always be willing to admit it, because I know a lot of Bigfoot researchers, because obviously that's my, foundation in all of this.
Sure.
That have been doing this for a really long time, and out in public, they're still worried about perceptions. They're still not willing to, go out on a limb for something or express some of their crazy theories out in public that they'll, willingly do in private if they're, close to you or something.
Right.
I have talked to several very close people who are adamant, flesh and blood believers whenever it comes to the subject of Bigfoot. And I remember whenever I first met them, even back then, they were talking about, they say that, some people see these things come out of UFOs and come out of orbs and everything else. And now you're starting to hear that in mainstream Bigfoot stuff.
Yeah.
but these old timers are still, staying in the closet, so to speak, whenever it comes to that sort of stuff. They just don't want people to put that label on them or not take them seriously. And there's a strong belief system in place, and always has been, that the only way to be taken seriously is to be skeptical and to be in the flesh and blood camp.
Oh, yeah.
But nowadays, like I said, whenever I started the woo side, as it's called, the paranormal beliefs, whenever it comes to Sasquatch specifically, was a small, tiny minority.
Right.
And now it seems to be the majority. It seems to be quite the opposite. Most people now are at least open to the idea that there has to be something else to this other than just some sort of uncatalogued primate running around hiding in the forest.
Yeah, I think there probably is. Although, again, like I was when I was on your show, it's like it's hard to get your mind around that, though. It's like, well, how does that happen? And the big hang up for me, I guess, maybe it's an unfair assessment of it, but I think of these things as very, I don't know, very, maybe not. I don't know how I want to say this, whether I don't mean like in a degrading way, but a more simplistic style of living. Like they live fairly on the world around them, it appears. We don't seem to know where they have their big, high rises and office buildings, but if they're there at all. And I'm not meaning to be real cheeky, but I mean, they just seem to live very much in balance with the nature around them, very wild, fairly. They don't seem to have a lot of, I'm at a loss for words here. They don't seem to have a lot of, I don't know how to say this. God, I'm gonna have to edit this. They seem to be operating in a maybe animalistic, but maybe it's just more of a simple kind of manner, like what we may consider like Neanderthals having behaved. And
I would say they're much more efficient than we are.
Well, yeah, there's that. There's definitely that. But it's hard to conceptualize how they would have this other whole quality about them that transcends this world, or at least our understanding of this world. And that's where I get stuck. How do you work through that?
Right now, you don't.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, like, I have the door open to guests on my podcast, regardless of their story, their beliefs, their theories. And I try to provide a nice, safe, happy place for them to tell their story.
Sure.
I don't challenge it. I don't question, if they're lying or not. I just let them share their story.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the researcher side of me is like, I never experienced anything paranormal related to Bigfoot. I never saw any evidence of it being paranormal. Everything I witnessed and found seemed like a flesh and blood breathing animal, no different than anything else out in the woods, except a lot smarter. I got to the point where I was like, okay, well, this isn't an animal. This is a person.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not like us. If you take a person and make them 9 feet tall, they still can't twist a tree around and snap it with one hand.
Sure.
So definitely not the same as us, but the same sort of thought processes, strategic planning, things like that, self-awareness, things that animals just are generally lacking, it seems.
Right.
But I was never at a point where I was like, okay, yeah, I'm convinced that these are paranormal. And I can usually explain different things, different aspects, the questions that people have, like, well, how come you only find one track and things like that. I can explain that in very simple terms, without going over the edge into the paranormal realm. Now, people saying, well, I was watching one and saw it cloak, or I was watching one as it came out of the portal. I have no answer for those.
Okay.
And I can't say that those people are lying because I wasn't there. Just because I didn't witness it doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Right.
And that's kind of where my whole position has ended up at this point.
Right. I think that's a fair position though, because anytime we listen to somebody, if we haven't had the experience, it's a leap of faith. Either you subscribe to it or you don't, or you just remain unsure, I guess, which is where I think you and I both land on this. I don't think either of us is denying that there's a possibility this is the case. It's just,
right.
What does it mean? How does that work? I don't know. And I guess that is the fascinating part of it. But so at this point in your journey, as your ideas have evolved through your journey into the subject specifically, would you say that these are more human-like, as you described, with potentially extra abilities that we just can't comprehend, or would you say that there's something else?
Well, see, before Bigfoot, whenever I was kind of focused on the paranormal stuff, one of the aspects to it that fascinated me whenever it came to unexplained topics was the idea of people having psychic abilities. Now, I've looked for people to demonstrate those psychic abilities to me in a way that it proves to me that it's real. Sure. I have yet to find that personally. But I've experienced some things on my own throughout my life, especially whenever I was younger, where I was like, oh, well, I mean, I just kind of always thought that this has to be a real possibility, that there were people out there that had abilities that for whatever reason, not everyone has. And I think that might be the case. I think there are some humans out there that can do things that maybe everybody has the ability and just doesn't know how to tap into it or whatever.
Right.
That's a whole can of worms on its own. But if that is true, then why not? Why couldn't it be true for Bigfoot as well? Maybe there are Bigfoot that have abilities that not all Bigfoot have. Or maybe because of their simplistic style of living, in tune with nature and everything, those abilities never got recessed in their minds like ours did, possibly, as we evolved into what we are today, depending on tools and clothing and fire and everything else.
Good point.
So that's kind of where I'm at with it whenever it comes to that subject, because again, mind speak, another common thing that gets brought up in Bigfoot, not something I ever experienced. Right. I still question, if you're out in the woods looking for Bigfoot and you hear a voice in your head, how do you know it was Bigfoot? Just because that's what you want it to be?
Yeah.
But I have talked to people that, I believe they experienced something, and I don't have an explanation for it. I don't know how it works, but again, it's something that people are experiencing.
Yeah.
And I've heard it enough to know that people are experiencing it, whether it's coming from Bigfoot or not. That's questionable. I think there might be other things at work. At least there's other possibilities besides Bigfoot out there.
Good point. Yeah, I think that telepathy to me makes sense. I think that maybe even we experience it ourselves. We just don't understand what it is we're experiencing. But, I've certainly had moments of precognition in my life. And I can't say that I'm psychic, but I think, outside of the fact that I think everybody is to a degree, or varying degrees, as you alluded to. But yeah, there's, I guess that's the one big thing about all of this for me, is that all of this stuff demonstrates that we just don't know a lot. It's certainly not nearly as much as we believe we know. That these impossibilities, quote unquote, keep poking through and kind of shattering the paradigm, or at least blurring it a bit, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, for sure. And who knows, in 200 years from now, this may be a mundane conversation of people, you don't know. Just looking how far we've come as a civilization in the past 100 years, 150 years.
Right.
All of this is relatively new. We're on one planet in the infinite galaxies out of outer space. Like, who knows? Like, we only learn things about things that we put money into and put resources into and study.
Right.
And Bigfoot and the paranormal is not one of those areas.
No, true enough. And that's why I think I've always believed that the big discovery in all of these fields are going to come from, people like the everyday person that has taken it up as their mantle or their hobby or their passion to go out and look for answers, because we're not really being helped out by the scientific community in any regard as far as these subjects are concerned. Maybe through the advent of science and discovery and technology, we will inadvertently answer some of these questions. But, my hat's off to all the people that do go out there and look for answers, whether they're investigating ghosts, whether they're investigating Bigfoot or UFOs or whatever. I think it's a huge undertaking and I guess a labor of love in most cases, because it's, you may never have an experience, even though you're out there looking your whole life. But on the chance that you might get one, that's pretty huge.
Well, there's also other aspects to it. The people you meet in Bigfoot, for instance, you're spending time out in nature. That's always a good thing.
Sure.
I never had a bad time on a Bigfoot outing, regardless of if anything ever happened or not. But yeah, you're right. It's those private individuals, the ones that are putting their time and money into this. I know I spent, countless, thousands and thousands of dollars on this over the years, and accomplished nothing that I can really, some stories. That's about all I walked away with, which were life-changing for me, but in the grand scheme of things, no, it didn't advance the ball any farther down the field or anything.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's kind of where we're at with everything as far as scientific acceptance or public acceptance is concerned. Not much has happened in any of these fields since we even started studying them.
Right. So in your journey, would you say the research came after you started doing, the discussions and shows? Or was it vice versa, where you're first researching and then branched into doing the shows and being a part of different communities and shows?
So it all kind of started out as just a general interest.
Okay.
Like I said, from, the paranormal side of things, I was already aware of Bigfoot stories.
Right.
And that led to different forums and stuff where discussions were taking place. And I was like, well, I like the outdoors already. I grew up in a family of outdoorsmen. So I was like, I want to go out and look for this thing.
Oh, okay.
And that's kind of how it all got started.
Gotcha.
And I was still relatively new to everything whenever I had my first sighting. And I was still kind of relatively new to everything whenever I did my first podcast. So,
well, the reason that I'm asking is because I was just having a discussion with Tommy Cullum of the Let's Get Freaky podcast. I just interviewed him prior to this, and he and I were talking, and it just kind of occurs to me that sometimes you got to wonder if these experiences aren't some kind of, some kind of divine providence almost, because it's like you see something and it motivates you to take a journey. And in your case, you were interested already. You had some incredible experiences growing up. You had seen, some Bigfoot experiences, and boom, suddenly you're a voice and you're perpetuating the message. And it just almost seems like almost by some grand design, if that makes sense. What do you think of that?
Oh man. Yeah. You're giving me chills. It's kind of crazy. It does seem at times like all of this is kind of mapped out by some higher being that has control of all the puppet strings or something.
Right.
I mean, if you just look at it for face value, like I went out there on the pretense of wanting to know if these things were real or not. My first sighting takes place in a parking lot. Like it was just like, here it is. Like it was showing itself to me.
Right.
Granted, another person had seen it and asked me to come verify what they were seeing, but just my sighting doesn't happen. And then the idea that I think it was like a month later, we have another sighting with a group of people, but my best friend is with me. From prior to Bigfoot. He was not a Bigfooter. He was going with me because Matt came home crazy. So he's going with me because he wants to, get to know these people. Who is he spending his time with? What is actually going on? And he ends up having a life-changing sighting.
Oh, wow.
From there, you go on through the internet and everything. In high school, backing up a little bit, I took like multimedia classes. I was going to be a radio DJ and ended up not following through with that. I did work for a short time at a local radio station, not as a DJ or anything, but I was always into broadcasting and media and television and audio engineering. And those were my, kind of my hobbies and passions.
Right.
And then the whole internet radio thing came along. So it was just really kind of a natural fit. But even that, it was like, somebody I knew was asked to sit in for somebody else who had a show that was going to be out for a while. And then that time ended, and then they wanted to do a show and asked me to come help them with their show. And it was just all really kind of like you're saying, just it seems predestined, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. And it's almost magical. I mean, I just reflect back to when I saw that the UFO, and this is something I talked to Tommy with. And when I'd been looking and never seen anything, but what are the odds that I would have been in the right location at the right time, in the right circumstances, and had the one tool that I would have needed to observe it, which was the night vision. If I hadn't been looking through night vision, I wouldn't have seen anything. But it was just that whole choir or chorus of events that just lined up perfectly for me to have that experience. And it really baffles me as I think back to it, because if any one of those variables were out of whack by just, moments or whatever, I wouldn't have had that experience.
Yeah.
So it was like I was supposed to have that experience. And I'm all about divine providence and divine intervention in our lives and stuff. I believe that that's a very real thing. So I'm not trying to imply that it's like, wow, it just blew my mind. But when you really stop and think about how these things line up, I mean, the mathematical, odds for these things to happen as they happen perfectly, in order to bring you to where you are. And it might be incredibly speculative, but it does seem like we're doing exactly what we should be doing, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even people not involved with this any longer, or people not involved with my podcast. I mean, like you, I'm a one-man show.
Yeah.
But if I hadn't met certain people, chances are I would not be here right now talking to you.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of crazy, but things just, I think, tend to work out like they're supposed to. And so, yeah, I think I'm where I'm supposed to be at. I've been incredibly fortunate whenever it comes to my podcast, being able to do it for all these years in one facet or another. Bigfoot Crossroads is kind of a new thing that's been around for a really long time.
Yeah.
But, I was always doing something since, back in around 2008, I think, is
right.
whenever I figured that I was getting serious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And being involved with like some of the very first, podcasts and internet radio shows on the subject in one way or another, and meeting all these incredible people and everything. It's just kind of put me in this position that I'm in, and I'm very thankful to be in it.
Yeah, it's really an incredible journey when you think about it. But I don't know, and maybe it's less of a unique thing as I think it is, but it does feel unique, and you do feel like blessed. I know I do, to be doing this and to be having these discussions and to be digging into these mysteries. And that's what's so fascinating to me. But
I mean, I got a story to support everything we're talking about right now.
Oh, go ahead.
So I have health issues, relatively new. I've had them for the past couple of years, but because of this, I had to go get a certain scan done. And my doctors were not able to do it because at the time COVID was going around and they had shut down that lab that they did that scan in. So they had to send me to a competitor, not something they do very often.
Right.
So I scheduled an appointment at this other hospital to go get this scan done. And that day we hadn't done laundry, and I grabbed the only clean t-shirt I had, threw it on. It happened to be a Bigfoot t-shirt. Now this Bigfoot t-shirt has like, a Bigfoot on the back, but on the front, it has a silhouette of the state of Oklahoma, which is where I'm from.
Oh, okay.
So I go to this appointment. I'm sitting there filling out the paperwork. I'm at a different hospital. They don't have me on record or anything. So I'm having to fill all that stuff out. I'm sitting in the seat next to the door that goes into the office, into the reception area, which is a glass door, completely glass. As I'm sitting there, out of the corner of my eye, I see this old man walk out. He's already had his appointment. He's leaving. I can see just kind of in my peripheral vision that he stops for a second, but I'm not paying any attention to him. But he turns around and he comes back and he says, "Hey, I like your shirt." And I look at him and I say, "Oh, thanks." Now, it has a silhouette of Oklahoma on the front. I'm thinking, nothing of it. Oh, he's from here, like
sure,
state pride, whatever. not even thinking about the Bigfoot on the back of the shirt.
Uh-huh.
He turns around, starts to leave again, stops again, and comes back. And now he's got my attention. So I look up at him, what do you want? I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm not happy right now. I'm at a hospital. And so I look up at him, and he's kind of looking around the room, making sure nobody's close by. And he says, I shot one when I was 12.
Oh my God.
And I'm just like, what's that?
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah. And this man, I would have to guess late 70s, early 80s.
Uh-huh.
And he starts unloading this story on me right there in the waiting room about how he was a kid staying at his friend's house. He told me where, this little town about 30 minutes outside of where I live. And he's like, yeah, I was over there, and we heard the horses out back. Something, had spooked them. And we go out there, and there's like an old porch light, and we flip the porch light switch on. And over by the horse corral is this thing that looks like a man covered in hair.
Oh, wow.
He said it wasn't real stocky or anything. It was kind of skinny, and it was real tall. And him and his friend are both there by themselves. And his friend's dad was like a county sheriff or something. And he was gone on patrol, I think. But he said by the back door, they kept like a varmint rifle.
Mm-hmm.
And he just picked it up and shot at the thing. And it was silhouetted against the side of the barn whenever he shot it. So he knows he hit it. Wow. And he just fired, and this thing yells and takes off running, and it gets out of the light and goes into the darkness. And they both run back inside and lock the doors. Well, the kid's dad gets home off duty, or he's coming home to check on them or something. And they tell him what happened. So he gets on the radio, calls some people out there. He had gone out there, found the blood trail. Oh. They followed the blood trail. It led across over to this neighbor's property. That neighbor said that he was out on his porch and something big and hairy came running by. He doesn't know what it was or anything. Oh, and as this old man's telling me the story, his eyes are welling up with tears, man.
Oh, wow.
And like, I was just like, wow, that's really amazing. Thanks for sharing that story with me. He was like, yeah, I haven't told anybody about it. Oh, and he said, well, have a good one. I hope everything works out for you. And he turns around and leaves. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like sitting there in awe, like that was crazy. And my wife's next to me and she's like, why didn't you tell him about your podcast? And I was like, what podcast? Oh my God, I have a podcast. Like it never even crossed my mind, because it was one of those human to human moments that you have.
Sure.
But that old man had no reason to lie to me. And the emotion in his voice, like there's no way he was making up that story just to pull my leg or something.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. But what are the odds that both of us would be in that doctor's office at that exact moment, and I would be wearing that shirt, and I'm somebody that would give a shit, and listen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is cool. It's kind of funny, but that a lot of people probably, obviously this is probably a stupid question on the face of it, but do you think that a lot more people have, this is maybe not as uncommon as we've been led to believe, basically because maybe most people just don't talk about it? Do you think these events are still pretty rare, or do you think they're maybe more common than we believe?
I think they're extremely common.
Okay.
I think the majority of encounters that people have, they don't even realize they had an encounter.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah.
And then, like you're saying, again, it takes a lot for someone, which most of these encounters that happen on somewhat of a regular basis, or somebody gets a good look at one, isn't going to necessarily be somebody from the city who's gone on a weekend camping trip, and while they were hiking, they saw one cross a trail or something. It's going to be people that live in those areas.
Right.
And those people, generally speaking, are not the type to, stir up any dust in the town that they live in and get a reputation of being Bob the Bigfoot guy or whatever.
Right.
And so I don't think they'd even talk about it if they did have one. And then you have to think about a sighting has to happen where the person is sure of what they saw. And then they have to come home and get on the internet or their phone or whatever and think enough of it to look it up and find a database and decide to make a report. And then that report has to actually get published or whatever before, generally speaking, any of us even find out about it.
Right.
So whenever you start taking those things into consideration,
right.
I don't think hardly anything gets reported, considering, all the obstacles that it has to go through before it gets to us.
And that's a good point. And even speaking of like reporting sites like the BFRO, and they're great sites. There's a few of them out there that handle, Bigfoot reports specifically, but then there's other sites like New Force and MUFON for the UFO stuff. And in all of those cases, they are probably not a real solid metric to go by anyway, because there are some regions where people talk about this stuff and there's some regions where they don't. And perhaps that would be a big indicator on like, everybody talks about Washington State and, North California and Florida. Those tend to be the top three, I think, for Bigfoot sightings, but only probably by virtue of those people being like, yeah, I saw a Bigfoot and let's report it, more so than in other areas where it's maybe not as common and then they just get buried, or it's just not as socially acceptable to discuss. Would you say that there's merit to that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I was just kind of trying to look here real fast. I don't know if I'm going to be able to. Yeah. So on the BFRO site, for instance, I'm just looking at Oklahoma, and they have 111 reports. We get more than 100 reports in a year in Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah.
I know researchers that are actively cataloging reports from witnesses, and some months you get 50 reports alone just in 1 month, if not more.
Okay.
And then there's like certain hotspot areas that people, the BFRO, for instance, is going to focus on an area like southeastern Oklahoma. It's where the Bigfoot conference is. It's, has a long history of Bigfoot sightings. That's the place. There's mountains, there's pine trees and everything. They're not going to pay attention to, say, central Oklahoma, where it's rural farmland and there's not that many woods and it's, mostly kind of going into a desert type climate. But there's tons of reports out there in the Native American communities that never get reported on an official basis. But you can literally, if you know someone and they trust you enough, you can talk to them about it, and they've had a sighting, or they know someone who's had a sighting, and sightings happen literally just about every week.
Wow.
In just a couple counties.
Okay.
And it's like that in different pockets all over the state. None of those reports are getting filed with anybody on an official basis. They're just stories that the people don't care. They don't care to report it. I mean, why bother?
Right. Do you think people should report them, or do you think is it just semantics at that point?
It's just semantics. I mean, the reports, they can be helpful to a researcher for the aspect of having a lead.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's just entertainment for people to go read on the internet.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, that's why people go to the BFRO site, is to read the sighting reports.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's kind of our bread and butter as well. If it wasn't for witnesses coming forward to tell their stories, would we be doing this? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as, it's not, again, helping to move the ball forward down the field.
Okay.
Because most people are under the understanding people don't make great witnesses. People can be mistaken. We know that people fabricate stories, unfortunately. I mean, people have come out on the internet and admitted that they submit fake reports to the BFRO, and that the BFRO just post them anyway, and they get away with it, and they, get a big kick out of it. So it's not really helping anything research wise other than providing possible leads for researchers in certain areas.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. I think that, those kind of repositories, I guess you're right, are mostly only valuable to those people looking to explore it further for themselves or for whatever reasons. But maybe by and large, it's just mostly viewed as an entertainment thing. But it would be, I think one of the big things that makes me kind of shudder and feel bad is that, as I've talked to you when I was on your show, it's like I think witnesses are so important because they do give us a pretty good look through their eyes of what they experienced and give us the opportunity to at least examine what was the pretext of what was going on, what was the actual event that happened, and to look at what was the result. And maybe learn something, maybe, again, behavioral profiling or whatever. But I think that, I actually have the same opinion of like nursing homes, all these old people sitting in nursing homes and nobody's visiting them and all of their life experiences are just being lost. Like there's such a value in the stories that people can tell, and such wisdoms they can pass along, insights. And it breaks my heart that so many stories are being left untold,
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the thing about it. So there's definitely data that can be drawn from these reports.
Mm-hmm.
You can look for patterns. You can look into behavior of witnesses and everything like that. Unfortunately, whenever you look at it from the side of the witness, maybe submitting the report will help them. But what really helps them is to talk to somebody that can tell them like, hey, you're not crazy. And other people in your county have also seen it.
Right.
That's what helps. But you don't really get a lot of that whenever it comes to this. And maybe it's just because there's not enough people, to respond individually. Maybe the witness doesn't want to be contacted. But I think, not to toot our own horns or anything, but coming on a podcast and talking about it is way more helpful than submitting a report to some website out there that may or may not even contact you or really care about your encounter,
right,
or do anything other than providing content for their website.
Sure. Now I've got to ask is, since you do know so many people that are in the Bigfoot world and in the researching aspects of it, do you see that the approach has remained largely unchanged, or do you see an evolution going on where new things are emerging or anything encouraging coming up in the field of Bigfoot research that you've heard of?
As technology advances, the tools get better.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's very helpful. Being able to stick a thermal camera on a drone, for instance, is way better than what was around whenever I was going out there. So there's that. I think the whole environmental DNA testing in general, as it progresses and gets cheaper and easier to do and people have more access to it, that will be a great thing. I know I was, talking about environmental DNA stuff back whenever I used to be a blogger on the subject years ago. And I know there's been a few researchers that have kind of tapped into the idea of maybe that's the route to go. So I think there's some promise, at some point we might be able to, for instance, find a track out in the woods and collect the physical matter from that track and use it to process to get DNA from the track. And maybe that will open some doors for us. Who knows? But in general, the tactics being deployed currently outside of the technology and tools that are available are relatively the same as they seem to have always been. I remember at one point in time in my young Bigfoot days, trying to come up with new ideas and stuff. And every time I came up with a new idea, it's like, yeah, they were doing that in the 70s.
Oh,
and it's kind of the same thing now. I see a lot of people that come forward with, they're new to the subject or whatever, and they come out with this great idea and this great theory that nobody's ever thought of before. And like, yeah, well, yeah, that's because you weren't around 20 years ago whenever everybody was talking about it.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's kind of like one of those things. Take ghost hunting.
Sure.
Ghost, it's same situation. People are doing the same things just with better equipment.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And maybe it's us hunting anything. I mean, it's the rules seem pretty much consistent across the board, whether you're duck hunting or deer hunting or whatever. Your scenery will change and maybe mildly some approach versus being a boat or in a deer stand or a tree stand or a blind. Basically you're just sitting out there. You might throw out some decoys, make some sounds, and hope to lure something in. But what was I going to ask? I was going to ask you something and it's just gone from my head. But I think that you're right. I think the evolution of technology will probably be the biggest game changer in it all. That with the availability of like thermals and like you said, environmental DNA. And can you just quickly unpack for the listeners in case anybody's not familiar with environmental DNA? What does that mean, or how does that change things?
Yeah. So environmental DNA, instead of taking like a tissue sample from something or a blood sample from something or a hair follicle and extracting DNA from that, you literally go into the environment that something lives in and collect, soil samples or water samples, for instance. And then you analyze the DNA found within that substrate, whatever it is, and extrapolate, okay, well, we got, squirrel DNA, so we know squirrels are in this area.
Oh, okay.
So there's, whenever I ran across it, it was extremely new.
Okay.
It was kind of being invented by these scientists over in Sweden, I believe. And what they had done was they were able to extract DNA from a fox's footprint in the snow.
Oh, wow.
So they knew that it was a fox footprint. So that, and they collected the snow. They actually, collected the entire track itself and pulled the DNA from that. And I know they've also, I've read studies where they've done stuff, like taken water from the ocean and figured out, all these different fish species that live in that part of the ocean or whatever.
Wow.
So the idea is that if you find a Bigfoot track, you could just collect the entire track itself instead of destroying it with plaster for a trophy and hopefully extracting, some DNA from possibly dead skin or something that fell off whenever it stuck its foot in the mud or whatever.
Oh, okay. Sure.
And that would allow us to say, okay, well, here's something that we don't have in our database.
Ah, gotcha. So do you think in that the environmental DNA could actually substantiate the species, or do you think it's are you one among the mindset that it's going to take a body?
DNA will open the door. It's always going to require a body.
Okay. Fair enough.
If that's what you're trying to do, if you're looking at it from the point of proving it scientifically, science needs a specimen.
Sure.
Plain and simple.
Okay. Well, fair enough. I mean, and I always wonder that because I think the biggest fear for me is that we just don't know what we're dealing with or how fragile they already are. And, the idea of trying to harvest a body, providing that it's somebody puts one down and is able to drag it in. What are the impacts of that? Because I don't know. I mean, there's varying ideas out there about how many of these things are living in the wilds around us, but sometimes the numbers seem incredibly generous, and other times they seem incredibly, like almost probably endangered. And so I don't know that we could ever really know, but it always makes you worry. Like, well, if you take this one individual out of that, what are the ramifications for the whole community of these things that may be out there or maybe not be out there?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a weird subject, man, because I'm from the standpoint of, I don't think we should prove them scientifically at this point.
Fair enough.
I'm kind of like, live and let live, man. It'd be cool to have some videos or something to watch, but maybe even that's a mistake.
Yeah.
I don't know. But you have like the idea of, can you even shoot and kill one? Sure. Again, are they even flesh and blood at this point? You've got people that are adamant that like, no, you can't kill one. But then I've heard tons of stories about people shooting them.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. There's stories of dead bodies,
Yep.
So what happens? There's stories of unmarked government entities showing up and taking bodies away.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Would they even allow it to be proven? And if they are covering up, why are they covering it up?
Right.
So it's just such a complicated mess that we really don't have a definitive answer on any aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, even from the story you shared of that gentleman at the hospital, I mean, he says he shot one and they did find a blood trail. So, I mean, obviously they can be shot and bleed. Given that this guy, it seemed very much like he was telling the truth.
Yeah.
Then one was wounded. But who knows what the end of that story is. Maybe it was just a flesh wound. Maybe it was a deep wound. Maybe it fell dead somewhere. But unfortunately that wasn't recovered. That seems to me the biggest tragedy, if people are just plunking shots and then they don't even collect it. It's like, oh no. So now what does that mean? Or what does that do for everyone else? I worry that people sometimes, if they are taking shots at these things and if they are hitting them, what are they doing for everyone else that might visit those woods into the future then? Because people equal bad at that point,
Oh yeah.
And what kind of liability does that create for, the family, the Jack family that goes out camping? Well, suddenly people equal bad and they have a hell of a bad time if, God only knows what could happen. So I don't know. It's a spitball of a lot of ideas, but I just love talking about this stuff with you, brother. And I really appreciate your candid thoughts on the subject. You've got almost 2 decades of experience in this, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this.
Oh yeah, for sure. I love talking about it, and I especially love talking about this stuff with someone like you.
Well, thank you, brother.
Something that kind of comes to mind on all this that has popped in my head from time to time over the years, talking about us being where we're supposed to be because of some sort of, prelaid plan or something.
Sure.
Maybe whenever it comes to Bigfoot and these other subjects, we don't ever have any proof because something is just not letting us have it. Maybe we're not supposed to prove it. Maybe we're not supposed to discover these things.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's something, a higher force at work making sure it just never happens.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you too, though. I'm in the live and let live camp, and I'm also really worried about them being officially substantiated because we don't know how many are out there, but and how fragile that population is. But I mean, if suddenly it became an established scientific fact, look, there's Bigfoot out there, and what would that do? Because then so many more people will be going out to these places where they're known to be, and pushing them out of whatever comfort they may have or whatever established routines they may have, just because they want to see one with the kids, and what kind of pressure will that put onto them, and could very well be pushing them into extinction just by our love of the subject.
Well, I mean, in the paranormal community, I know that provoking spirits for a response is highly controversial. There's always people on one side of the fence or the other.
Yeah.
And yet whenever it comes to Bigfoot, that's the most common tactic used. You're trying to provoke and elicit a response from them, whether it's knocking on trees or doing vocalizations or baiting them or whatever you're trying to do. You're trying to interfere with their life and get a response out of them.
Good point. That's a great point. I never would have put that together, man. Well, it's always a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for making the time for me today and for our listeners. I really appreciate it. Oh,
for sure. I've enjoyed it, and hopefully it'll happen again on down the road.
Oh, absolutely it will. Like, that's a question mark. But why don't you take a couple minutes and let people know how to stay in touch with you, brother?
Yeah, the easiest way is just check out the website, bigfootcrossroads.com. All the things you need are all right there. All the past episodes, contact information, social media, everything, all in one place.
Amen. Well, thanks a lot, Matt. I had a great time, and we'll definitely do it again.
For sure, man. Thanks for having me on.
All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for us today. So hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thank you again so much for all your love and support. And remember, if you want to follow the Paranormal Portal, probably the easiest way is to head over to paranormalportal.net. And that's the homepage for the Paranormal Portal. And you'll find links to all of our different social media and sites and information about the shows, including our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/paranormalportal. Or just look for Paranormal Portal on Google or whatever search engine, and you'll find links to our social media such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. So we're kind of all over the place, and we're spreading as well as we can. But anyway, thank you so much for the love and support. You all take care, and remember, we love you all. Be good, be kind, be nice. Take care of each other, help each other out, find the magic in every day, and remember to laugh as much as you can. Until next time.